Good afternoon. You'll be glad to hear this is the last time I interrupt your conversations during the 2 days. If I could encourage you to take a seat, don't be shy, do come forward and find a seat near the front. That would be great. I do hope that you've really enjoyed the sessions this morning and it's kind of carried on in the same vein. I have the joy of the last slot before you go. I realise that I'll be between you and your trains and that you'll want to stay to hear our keynote. So if I don't get a chance, if you do have to disappear, lovely to see you and we hope you really enjoyed the event, but I will say some more formal thank yous at the end. But it's my pleasure to introduce our final keynote speaker. And it is a pleasure, but also I have to have my phone because of the number of things that I have to credit through our speaker's career. So we are immensely privileged to have Lord David Willetts speaking. And I was trying to work out how to explain his history to those who perhaps are less familiar or who've come from overseas. So David is a Fellow of the Royal Society, a President of the Resolution Foundation, Chair of the UK Space Agency, a Visiting Professor at King's College, Chair of the Foundation for Science and Technology, an MP for over 20 years, was the Minister of Universities and Science, worked at the Treasury and the Policy Unit, an author of economic and social policy, including a book on university education, and also, equally importantly, a son of Birmingham. And so it is brilliant to have David, with his long history, thinking about innovation and how that works in the economy and society, come and talk to us today. And I will introduce him to the stage in a second. At the end, we have a little bit of time for Q&A, and that will work in the same format. So do think of what questions you might ask, and we can pose them to David at the end. But without further ado, let me invite David to take the podium. Thank you.
Great, well thank you very much, Stuart. And look, it is great for me personally to be back in Birmingham, where I was brought up. My family, we were all Birmingham craftsmen, artisans, and my father was an engineer in a Birmingham engineering firm. I decided not to do my Birmingham accent. I'm going to restrain myself from that, but it is always wonderful to be here. And it's wonderful to be here for this event, talking about that fundamental role of universities, which I do describe in my book, A University Education, still available from all good bookshops. And look, I think now the knowledge exchange mission has really established its place alongside the other classic missions of the university, the teaching mission and the research mission. And without sounding complacent, I would say that when I see close up the pressures on those two, teaching under pressure because fees have not been indexed with inflation, so the real resource behind each British student has fallen in real terms by 25%, and research actually operating at a substantial deficit, estimated at over 5 billion, because a lot of research is not funded at full economic cost. Those are the pressures in the environment you're all operating in, but within that, I think that the knowledge exchange function and that specific pot of money, HIFE, carries on with strong support and I think continuing support. So although you've got all the pressures on the higher education environment, I think that knowledge exchange function has as important a role now as ever, and in fact I would say a growing role. And it's long been an argument, do universities apply research properly? Do they take the opportunities to do the kind of things which now TTOs encourage them to do? That famous British eccentric mathematician, G.H. Hardy, was supposed to have started grand Oxford, Cambridge dinners. Here's to pure maths and may it never be applied. And I did actually meet a Nobel Prize winner, got his Nobel Prize in economics, really was interested in maths, who told me how he had set himself the challenge of doing some maths that was entirely curiosity driven and had no practical value. And he was very interested in mathematical modelling of knots. So he was starting to try to write some of the maths that you could capture in a formula for knots. And he thought he had done proper, pure maths. Until his son phones him up from university, studying biology, and says, "Dad, I should warn you, that maths you did for knots, they're using it in the DNA, accounts of DNA that I'm studying at university." So in a way, all of the body of knowledge that is created at universities ends up being applied. All of it is adding to that fantastic coral reef, and it's very hard to predict exactly how it's to be applied or in what way, but I think all of it adds up to something fundamentally useful in human knowledge. But in order for that to happen, it's got to be spread around. And here in Birmingham, at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, the historians, when they argue about why did Britain have the Industrial Revolution, why was the Industrial Revolution here in England, indeed here in this part of England, in Manchester, Birmingham, why did it start here? I think one of the most powerful explanations from thinkers like Joel Mockyer is that for the first time we had the efficient communication of knowledge. Technological advances were being made in the Roman Empire. There were doubtless craftsmen innovating in the way they used their tools, but there was no mechanism for spreading the information around. And Stuart kindly referred to my being elected as a fellow of the Royal Society. The Royal Society, created in 1660, one of the reasons why it's so important historically is it didn't regard science as a mystery that was kept private in special groups hidden behind code. It believed in the publication of results and the challenging of results. And we did have, as an open society, we had learning societies, we had journals, we had magazines in which young inventors were comparing notes. So we played a role in that. Now let me just speed up on history, but especially as we have some American visitors here, we of course, in the Second World War, when we signed up with the US for Lend-Lease, the Americans set one condition, which is very relevant for the work that you guys do today in tech transfer offices. One condition was that Britain would not take out patents for jet engines, penicillin, or radar. They worked out the three technologies which were most significant, which we had most recently developed, and required that we did not protect them from American business. That was part of the deal. The Attlee government learned a painful lesson from that and set up the National Research Development Corporation to own all the IP. Then, and Stuart's very hot on this history because we've reached an anniversary. In 1985, Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph famously decided that all the patents should not belong to a national organisation. They should be instead belong to the universities where the ideas began. It was our equivalent of Bayh-Dole. And I wasn't directly working on this, I remember some of the discussions. I was actually working for Margaret Thatcher in her policy unit then when those decisions were taken 40 years ago. And I don't think initially it had the kind of impact we might have hoped. But to my mind, this all really started getting serious at the beginning of this century, when we had high funding created in 2001. So it's now a stable, established part of the university framework. We had Praxis created by David Secker in 2002, and I gather David, who's the doyen, who's the hero of all this, I gather he was here yesterday, and of course, what we have today, not here, is the direct heir of what he created over 20 years ago in Praxis, then became Praxis Unico. And we also had the Lambert Review in 2003. And that all, I think, got this started. And Knowledge Exchange UK today is the heirs for all that. So we've got, where are we now? I think we have a healthy and vibrant scene. The data is not quite as reliable as one would hope, but overall it looks as if we have a lot of knowledge emerging from universities and being successfully commercialized. There's various estimates of the value. Recent reports captured brilliantly on the Knowledge Exchange website, the PA Consulting report, and also a separate report by Thomas Coates Albrechtsen they suggest very high rates of return of hundreds of millions of pounds of value every year, and relative to the amount put in through Hive and other ways, these are returns that are minimum in one estimate 7.4 returns, and on some estimates a lot higher than that. And in the week when the public expenditure review is being finalised, there's no harm pushing those figures for economic returns from Hive out into the public arena again. We've got high returns from Hive funding. We've got a strong technology transfer office network. We have strong support for what is going on. We've got the rise of university partner funds, which started, of course, with Oxford Science Enterprises and Cambridge Innovation Capital, but now there are many others, and they're represented here, such as Northern Grimstone, Midlands Mine Forge. We've got that happening. So overall, the scene is healthy, even though the overall context for education is tough. What are the issues now? I think there still is a problem in the incentive structure facing academics. For universities to get to the top of these league tables, the kind of metrics that are used are research citations, things like that, which don't capture the value created by the application of their ideas or their successful commercialisation. And too often we see universities and academics for whom the incentives don't sufficiently reward application. And I have to say, because they're should be most relevant to what we're talking about today, you can see that vividly in the challenges facing business schools. Business schools should be absolute partners of TTOs, should be part of the way in which a university connects to its local business community. But too often, the way that a business school gets up the rankings for excellence as a business school is by the research that is done and published in the prestigious journals, and they tend to reward innovation in statistical techniques, which requires large data sets. Often the large data sets are collected from historic studies of American business sectors. Business schools do not engage as much with the local business scene as I would like, and it's a vivid example of the problems about how to get up the rankings and the incentives facing individual professors in their careers at business schools. So I think that's still an issue. I think there's still also work to be done on skills and training in commercialisation and ensuring that young researchers have the opportunity to learn how best to commercialise and apply their research. I'm a great fan of CDTs, where often you are conducting doctoral research but with a link to a practical application or a business opportunity. And it's incredibly frustrating that we had applications for CDTs with businesses willing to put up money as a partner, and they did not all get funded. And there were some excellent CDT proposals with proper mix of public and private money that ended up not being funded when I think they should have been a very high priority. Praxis Unico, and of course now Knowledge Exchange UK does itself an excellent contribution there on training. Most recently, we've had the spin-out review, and I'd just like to touch on that, not least because I was actually a member of the advisory council for the spin-out review. And again, it's got some great strengths, but there are some warnings. Spin-out is not the only thing that a tech transfer office can do, and it's not the only way that a university creates value. There are other ways of creating value which are not captured by counting the number of spin-outs. And everything from contract research to licensing arrangements or to applications in public services, those are all things that are value that a tech transfer office can help with. It is not simply the creation of spin-outs. And part of the aim of the exercise, I thought, was to put spin-outs in a wider context. One metric, but by no means the only metric. But because we can count spin-outs, it tends to get the most attention. But there were some good practical proposals in that report. One of the historic problems is universities have been too greedy in the equity stakes they have been taking in spin-outs. In some ways, they were worried about the disaster of success. What they were most worried about is there would be some amazing spin-out that ended up being worth hundreds of millions of pounds, and someone would say to them, why don't you own more of this company? And part of the exercise in that spin-out review, and I know the Treasury felt this very strongly, was to persuade universities that it is not their job to contribute to the economy by extracting large amounts of value in very large equity stakes just in case this company ends up being worth a lot. Having a successful company that's worth a lot itself is an economic benefit. It doesn't need to be captured by very large equity stakes, and the healthy trend is downwards. The average university equity stake now is, on the latest estimate earlier this year, something that Research England published, is down to 16%, from being over 20% quite recently. That, I think, is partly because of a very strong message from the Spin Out Review. There were some other messages from the Spin Out Review, which are particularly relevant to a company I chair, GenIP, which has been represented here at this conference, and which I'm very proud to be chairing, because we engage with some of the other issues from the Spin Out Review. Let me quote the Spin Out report. First, on time and speediness. This is a direct quote. Universities should have clearly stated expectations on time to complete the stages of the spin-out process by both the university and founders. University approvals needed for a standard spin-out should be delegated to trusted individuals and not taken by committees that meet infrequently. Speed the whole thing up. Don't do it slowly. Very important piece of advice, I'm sure you recognise. We think we can help with that at GenIP. Secondly, capacity. Let me quote again from the report. We heard significant praise for the work TTO staff do, but also were repeatedly told that TTO staff are overworked and that bottlenecks can develop. This is not solely due to funding. It can be due to decisions on priorities, a lack of standardisation, or high staff attrition because of uncompetitive salaries compared with the private sector. Small research universities may only have 1 or 2 staff responsible for licensing with less than 1 spin-out per year. This may mean that employees in the university are less exposed to the market, less specialised in individual sectors, less able to refine and streamline their spin-out processes, so potentially there is underexploited IP in small universities. So TTOs can have more help in understanding and analysis of the wide range of options available, as TTO staff are so overworked. And then there's tricky issues about the role of academics themselves. Again, let me quote the Spin Out report. Decisions on who gets funding are often taken by committees of academics who may lack experience and expertise on what research project has genuine commercial potential. We think there's a clear opportunity here. That's their report again. And there are very difficult decisions that people in this room are involved in. When there's a professor, potentially a senior professor at university, who thinks his or her project is incredibly valuable, and you've got to make the assessment and tell the professor that sadly it's not necessarily a priority for your TTO. Objectifying that, having some external report which is an evaluation that means that you can say this is not a personal opinion of yours, hostility, there's no hostility to the professor, it is external advice. And what we try to do in GenIP is help with those challenges. We support research institutions and innovation-focused organisations in commercialising new technologies, both through our Invention Evaluator and also through which provides the expert-reviewed assessments of new technologies, and also Vortex, which helps organisations recruit innovation leaders. And we use generative AI in order to deliver prompt, rapid, expert assessments of new technologies, together with some human oversight as well. And we hope this helps people operate at lower cost and more promptly. Let me end with just some other observations about how the wider agenda is shaping up, and how I'm sure you here, as TTOs and other agents, want to contribute, and we try to as well at GenIP. I would say, first of all, the good news is that the economic agenda shaped around the industrial strategy, which is going to be published any day now, will definitely recognise the significant role of universities and knowledge exchange. I was a bit disappointed that the Green Paper for industrial strategy didn't say as much about higher education as I'd hoped. The role of higher education was not as prominent as it should have been. But when you look at the 8 key pillars of industrial strategy, it's very hard to see how any of them can flourish without effective business clusters and high levels of knowledge exchange, often drawing on the resources of universities. And I hope and believe that there will be more recognition of the value of higher education and its contribution to industrial strategy in the white paper when it appears. And it's hard to see how universities can make that contribution without the work that you do in knowledge exchange. So I think industrial strategy is going to be a really useful and valuable aid for what you do. Secondly, the arrival of a new senior figure in the Treasury, Jim O'Neill, appointment just announced, is I think also good news. He completely gets the value of university clusters and the value of higher education. He, of course, has been involved in Northern Gritstone, so he's seen close up exactly what university-based investment can do. I think he will put the pressure on for the regional agenda. And again, you will know, if you look at the metrics where the most spin-outs are being created, where the commercialisation seems to have most VC backing, it tends to be in the Golden Triangle and London, Oxford, Cambridge. I'm sure we will hear a push from the government, especially to reach out to the twin second cities of Birmingham and Manchester. And what we've done at Resolution Foundation, the think tank of which I'm president, absolutely says if you look at Britain's productivity problem and what should be done about it, the challenge is that productivity is high around London and the southeast, which has the agglomeration effects of large numbers of highly educated, highly skilled people all coming together in creative clusters. Birmingham and Manchester should be performing similarly, but they're not. The number of graduates who can get to the centre of Birmingham within half an hour, given the state of the Birmingham transport system, there was a fascinating piece of economic research comparing the practical travel number of people who could manage that in Birmingham compared with France's second city, Lyon. And it showed that the number of graduates who would get to the centre of Birmingham within half an hour was incredibly low hundreds of thousands compared to the number that could get to the centre of Lyon. That makes it very hard to have the creativity, the agglomeration benefits, the productivity of large number of people working together in dense clusters. And I'm sure Jim will be pursuing that agenda. And then, thirdly, a piece of advice, because I think it reflects the way that ministers are thinking and working on all this. We often talk about commercialisation, and as I said before, we often think that commercialisation means spin out. I think commercialisation doesn't fully capture the value of universities which ministers would understand. I would call it application, not commercialisation. It's just as much about a new treatment in the healthcare system. It's as much about innovation in education itself. There are different ways in which advances, innovation and technology have value for our economy, and that's not simply always captured by clear commercialisation. And they have a real focus on reform and innovation in public services. They've got public expenditure constraints, there's limits to what they can do, showing the way in which innovations emerging from universities help make the healthcare system more efficient, help drive innovation in education. That type of application is as valuable as commercialisation. So I think this is a great moment for the knowledge exchange agenda. It's up there in many ways, with not quite as intense pressures as the teaching and research missions face. I think that it will have proper recognition in the industrial strategy. I think there's a widespread understanding of the value of HIFE, and HIFE in turn needs to be used properly to fund your activities. There are still challenges, but I'm confident that Knowledge Exchange UK will ensure that we tackle them. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David. And the reason why I outlined all of those different roles that David has is the multiple perspectives he has on this space. And it's wonderful to hear that. But also the long-standing view of the evolution of tech transfer, commercialisation and knowledge exchange. Now, David very generously will take questions. And And as no hands have immediately shot up, I'm going to use presenter's privilege to ask the first question. But do please put your hand up and the mics will come to you. My first question is, this morning we were prompted to think about growing the confidence and capability in this sector, and also thinking about how we can tell the story of what's going on much better to politicians, but also to the public. And I just wonder, kind of in response to that session this morning, how can we be more confident and capable and show the capability in the UK around this, but also how can we tell the story better?
Well, I think there's I'm always a bit frustrated when I hear that great cliched observation: Britain has 4 of the world's top 10 universities, taken as a badge of pride. And we can be very proud of Oxford and Cambridge and UCL and Imperial. But they're being measured as great on one set of metrics, particularly around a certain sort of research excellence. And there are other ways in which universities can be world class and really make an economic and practical contribution, other than moving up those type of research rankings. And something that I recommend, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, is just taking every opportunity to remind people of how universities add value in many ways. Here we've got the University of Birmingham, we have a fantastic research-intensive university. The University of Coventry plays a really important role in links to the Midlands car industry and delivering practical vocational training for the car industry. Leeds and Manchester are fantastic, prestigious universities. It's Teesside and Sunderland that have the proper closest links to the Nissan and Honda up in the northeast. And it's Oxford Brookes that does a lot of the applied research to make the Midlands and Oxfordshire and Northamptonshire the centre for the technologies in Formula One racing. And just the more we can broaden the understanding that universities come in different shapes and sizes, and there is not one metric, there's not one league table on which everybody can be ranked. And one of my frustrations that I've been fighting this battle for years is just not to allow a single league table as a kind of measure of what universities do ends up undervaluing practical application and commercialisation of research. And whenever you've got an example coming from your university, make sure that it's shared with the local MP, and that there's a local, if it's helping out in the local hospital, it's a news story in the local papers, and provide it to bodies like University UK that want to try to convey that message.
So we have a question. I should say, please do put your hand up and a microphone will come to you. And when you ask your question, as the person in the microphone will do, can you just introduce yourself and your organisation? But if you have other questions, put your hand up and another microphone will come to you. Thank you. Go for it.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Nellie Willis, Durham University. I just wanted to pick up on something you said in relation to spin-out review, that the reason that universities were taking a high equity stake was due to them being greedy and frightened of success. As someone at the coalface of tech transfer, I say that that is extremely inaccurate view that's come through the spin-out review. The equity stakes were, in my view, generally related to the fact that before research outcomes actually have the potential of commercialisation and benefiting the public, universities generally put decades of support into that department, that team, in terms of personal people resources and keeping the lights on. And I just want to take the opportunity to perhaps give a different view to what came out in the spin-out report, and that the dilution of the encouragement for universities to further dilute their equity stake rather gives a lot more benefit to the VCs and is slightly unfair to universities.
Well, I mean, it varies, and certainly in some disciplines you can really get down to measuring use of expensive equipment. In other disciplines, disciplines that are more software related, for example, or in the arts and humanities, it's hard to make those type of estimates, and there is just a bit of a distribution of higher equity stakes when there are the circumstances you describe. But look, the Spin-Out review was co-chaired by Irene Tracy from Oxford, and these conversations were had, and she accepted, I think, that Oxford had got too high a percentage, and that one of the effects of this, which you shouldn't dismiss, is that it put off investors. If you wanted to get investors in, they didn't want to have too high a university stake was for them a deterrent. So there was a consensus, I think, in the look. I wasn't on the main jury; I was one of the advisors on the advisory committee. But there was a consensus that they had become too high and had become a deterrent, and that is why there is now a clear trend, which I welcome. Cambridge had actually got lower, but was taking lower stakes than Oxford. There was an Oxford-Cambridge variation. Oxford in particular has been going down. And again, I have to say, I understand the point you're making, that one of the reasons that I think in the north, in Northern Gridstone, initially it was taking very large stakes, and I think those have come down just in the few years that Northern Gridstone has been operating, and that in turn has helped get more investment in. So it doesn't have to be, if you want more investment in, you do have to lower it again.
One of the, again, the lights are sort of in my eyes, so I can't entirely see where the questions are, but one of the kind of themes of the conference has been around, as you pointed out in your talk, around the focus on spin-outs and the need to also think about collaboration with industry, and that need to collaborate. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how we can shift that focus, or what we need to do to try and encourage increasing R&D activities between universities and businesses in the UK.
Well, there's a range of knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange initiatives, which just try to break down the barriers. As soon as you get beyond the largest companies, there are still many SMEs that don't know how useful their local university could be. There was a great initiative which carries on in some parts of the country, innovation vouchers, where the idea was that you invite, if an SME has got a problem, doesn't understand exactly the features of a new alloy it's using, but can't get the relevant software for its R&D, they can apply for an innovation voucher, which essentially comes with a small pot of money that can be spent at a local university tackling the problem they've identified. And for the first time, they actually set foot in the university chemistry department, or metallurgy department, or software, computer science, and find that there's a piece of kit and an expert whose services they get for 2 days, paid for by the innovation voucher. And although that helps them with a specific problem, it also breaks down a barrier and helps create more communication in future. And some of the programs linking graduates up with local employers, knowledge transfer can also help on all that. So yeah, there are good practical initiatives that break down those barriers, and they're incredibly valuable.
So we have a question here, and then we have another question over there. So Caroline, do introduce yourself and your institution.
Very much indeed for your words so far. So Caroline Hyde, Cambridge Enterprise. I'm really interested, given what you said about the Golden Triangle, and obviously we know the emphasis that's been placed on Cambridge as a sort of a growth powerhouse and the government's agenda to drive further faster. But how does the Golden Triangle look to work with other parts of the country to ensure that this doesn't become an emphasis and that we don't lose all the incredible work that's being done, to build up other areas?
Yeah, and that is such a challenge, because we are ultimately talking about fixed budgets, and as you know, there is, and I think this has had an influence on ministers. I think it was Richard Jones, now at Manchester, who showed that if you look at the geographical distribution of business R&D, it is more evenly distributed than the distribution of publicly funded R&D. And he uses that to argue that the public distribution doesn't even reflect the balance of commercial activity. Look, I have been chairing Innovate Cambridge, and I see these issues. Where Cambridge has got a strategic partnership with Manchester, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And there's at least one specific startup in Cambridge that has got a partnership with Durham, where the advanced manufacturing facility is in Durham, not in Cambridge. And the more that Cambridge can be seen as a national asset and is making connections with other parts of the country, I think that creates goodwill and greater willingness in the political class to value and continue to put public support for R&D into Cambridge.
And then we have another question over there.
So Phil Clare, Queen Mary Innovation. We were just talking on the way in about how when you were Science Minister you came to Oxfordshire and asked the pointed question, why is the whole so much less than the sum of the parts and what are you going to do about it? And we spent the next 10 years trying to answer your question. So part of the challenge I think that you noted and that we saw was that local authorities, local economic development agencies didn't understand very well what the offer was from science and innovation in universities. And it was very hard to organise regions to get behind the innovation message. So we in universities have worked hard at understanding knowledge exchange and what we can do. Do you think we are yet there with other local actors understanding what universities can really achieve for the economy?
No, there is still this kind of picture of universities as ivory towers where people go to study medieval philosophy or something, and there's nothing wrong with studying medieval philosophy, but it doesn't really capture today's university. And I always think and this is not a uniquely British problem, on the West Coast, I have made the pilgrimage to Dave Packard's garage, Hewlett Packard originating in that garage. But when you look into the history of Hewlett Packard, you find that it wasn't so much Packard's garage, it was Hewlett's master's thesis at the University of Stanford, which was really where the value came from. So and we tend that kind of picture, and my father ran an apprenticeship program at his engineering firm, but that kind of picture which plays down the element of the sheer research value added by the university, I think is still with us. And that's why the more you can get people inside the university, the better. If I remember those meetings with Oxford, the other thing I would say is that universities themselves can do more. I think my frustration then was partly that Oxford didn't have the kind of links to Harwell that I thought it should have. And we partly privatised the ownership of Harwell to try to create an environment which promoted startups. And something else that is really exciting, it's happening in other parts of the country as well, is these place-based investment in labs, sometimes not even linked to a university. Look what ARC is doing, ARC, the Canadian investors, literally converting parts of Canary Wharf and a building in Hammersmith into wet labs, just because there's a shortage of wet labs. So a greater understanding of the role of labs and science in innovation and getting that message across whenever possible.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question if there's any. If not, I'm going to ask a slightly dangerous question. So, David, you referenced that 40 years ago you were around the conversations that sort of made a significant change to the way IP is done. If you dream ahead 40 years, and if you think about the role of universities in the economy and society, what would you hope you would see in 40 years' time from how knowledge exchange, commercialisation, innovation, the impact of the application of knowledge from universities? What would you hope to see from the practitioners and policymakers of the next 40 years?
Well, that's a great challenge, and I would add something which I should have touched on earlier. And look, I chair something called the Regulatory Innovation Office, which is trying to ensure that we don't have regulations as a barrier to new technology and innovation. But when you look at where the regulation comes from and when it goes wrong, it's often that people have got so excited about the science and the technology They've forgotten about the morality, the ethics, the public culture, the public values that everybody lives by. And there's a panic about GM or something because nobody's bothered to place a scientific advance in some wider context. And a data regime, so people are confident about what happens to their data, is going to be necessary for public trust in AI. And if you're looking at a place where technology and science is studied, where there is also an understanding of ethics and history and public value, that is what a university should represent. And the idea of university should be where, indeed, the people working in the labs also meet the people who are the ethicists. One of the reasons why Britain is a world leader in biotech is the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority. And the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, in turn, derives its international reputation from the work done by Mary Warnock, a moral philosopher. And if there's a place where the people doing the technology side are also in an environment where there are people thinking about the ethics, the purpose, the national value, it should be a university. I can't think of a better place for that. A university, it's why the university is such a wonderful environment, and that kind of environment matters more now than ever.
Thank you, David. Thanks very much. If we can give David a round of applause. It's wonderful to have that length span, and it's great that you can come here, but I know also you've got things to do in Birmingham today, which will be a great joy for you, I think, about history. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks very much. Thank you.
I now have the unenviable task of being between you and trains. I know it's been, in some sense, a very long couple of days. What I've noticed going around is we are a very engaging community. And if you're like me, you're probably quite tired from all of those interactions with different people. So I promise not to take too much of your time, but there are some important things I need to say. I mean, I hope this conference has inspired you to go ahead about the importance of what we're doing and the importance of collaborating. I've said a couple of times, we have a range of people in this room from different perspectives, thinking about commercialisation and social impact, policy and the role of place. We have people from professional services, from R&D companies, from research and education institutions, from supporters of knowledge exchange and funders of knowledge exchange. And what's been wonderful about the sense is how we are all working together and collaborating to try and do things. So I hope you go back to your office, wherever that is in the UK, or even further afield, with a stronger set of connections that you can draw upon, and that ultimately that you come back next year to strengthen those collaborations and those networks, to work together and to develop. Now, I should say very quickly that this whole event isn't straightforward to put on, and that I want to thank the team who've helped do this. So you'll have seen them in orange t-shirts. Thank you, Ian. If you give a round of applause to the team, that would be great. Hopefully we look like a beautiful swan, elegant on the surface, but with lots of frantic kicking underneath that hopefully you haven't seen. It takes a lot of time and effort, and I know that they'll be going home this evening for a very good night's sleep after all the events and activities. I also want to thank our conference advisory group. So as I said this morning, what we do as a professional body is informed by our members, both the organisations and the individuals, and we really value the relationship with all of you as members. I'd love it if you can tell people in your organisations that they are also members, that they can also benefit. Because we have that institutional membership, people in the office down the road doing something to do with impact are equally included if they know the way to find the website, and particularly KE Connect, our online platform. So please do spread the word internally and think about where other people can benefit from being part of this community and some of the things we do. I digress slightly, but these people have been incredibly helpful and useful in informing what the programme and content looks like and how this has come together. So we're very grateful for their time and the application of their grey matter into what we do. And of course, we will be back doing a conference next year. I haven't got a grand reveal of where in the UK that will be. But if you want to have a say in that, please do come and get in touch and be involved in next year's conference advisory group. We want to make it relevant, and we need you to help us to do that. So thank you to all of those people. I sort of flashed this slide this morning. That's just one of the things we do, and we're very grateful for all of that activity across the UK. So equally, if you think there are people in your organisations that would be a useful presenter or course director, or have really strong and interesting thoughts on the Concordat, the KU Concordat, some of you went to a session earlier, or our skills framework and want to know more, please do feel free to get in touch with one of the team, and we'll happily connect you into those groups. Or start a conversation on KU Connect. I'd love to see that being a vibrant place where you pose a question and you get the benefit of crowdsourcing those answers. And my final thank you, well, my penultimate thank you, is to all of our sponsors. I really do mean that they are an absolutely key part of the ecosystem. David mentioned, the Gen IP and what they can do in terms of productivity. That's just one of the examples of how all of these organisations, all of these sponsors, can help us to do our job and are a key part of that system developing. So we're very grateful for all of them supporting this activity. I know you'll have seen them on the stands and had a conversation, but we are very grateful for their support. And finally, I thank you to you. This is a community that comes together and shares knowledge. So we thank you for your participation. We thank you for being involved and continuing to be involved. And on that note, I shall say thank you and let you go on your way around the UK and hope to see you next year. Thank you.